New York City, the 1980s. Minimum wage is $3.35 per hour. Abandoned buildings, vacant lots, food stamps, and government cheese were the norm for most households across the 5 boroughs. That was the reality for most people. For a specific group of teenagers, reality looked completely different. These were the boys who looked at $3.35 per hour and made a different calculation, who grew up in Wagner projects and Marcy projects and Cypress Hills and Park Hill and the High Bridge section of the Bronx and looked at what the legitimate economy was offering and decided it wasn't enough. By the time they were 16 and 17 years old, these teenagers were letting each other owe millions of dollars. Millions in fives and singles. So much cash they didn't know where to put it. One of them described it himself. You can't hide $2 million in fives and singles. That's something the average person can't grasp. They can't grasp a black man being able to do something that an Italian boy can't do. This compilation is about the New York City millionaire kids that history never told you about. Not the names you already know, the ones who set the trends that everyone else followed, who were buying foreign cars with cash at 15 years old while still in high school, who were the blueprint before the blueprint. 8 stories, 5 boroughs, 1 era, none of them over 17 when it started. Number 8, Jesse Gray and Freddie Meyers. Harlem, the heroin era. Before the crack era changed the arithmetic of the New York drug trade, there was heroin. And in Harlem, the heroin era produced its own millionaires. Jesse Gray, Freddie Meyers, young hustlers who became millionaires before the crack era hit. Boys who were 16 and 17 years old, making money on a grand scale in an era when the game had different rules, different rhythms, and different consequences. Their world was described by the men who lived inside it with the specific reverence that survivors use when they talk about something that can never be recreated. Money was growing on trees in Harlem then. You come right here, shake a tree, and $100 bills came out. That is not nostalgia. That is the specific memory of a man who was 16 years old in Harlem during the heroin era and watched money materialize around him faster than he could process what it meant. They did things for one another that the legitimate business world would have called extraordinary credit arrangements. They let each other owe millions of dollars. Not hundreds, not thousands, millions. Cash transactions between teenagers in Harlem, where a man would extend another man millions in product on the trust, built between 2 boys from the same neighborhood who had decided together what their lives were going to be. They couldn't hide $2 million in fives and singles. That sentence tells you everything. The money was so real and so physical and so overwhelming that the basic problem of where to put it was one they hadn't fully anticipated. Most people cannot grasp what that looks like. Jesse Gray and Freddie Meyers grasped it before they were adults. They were the original Harlem millionaire kids, the ones who set the standard that every generation after them was chasing. Number 7, Bob Lemon and the Get Paid Brothers. Wagner Projects, East Harlem. Around 1980, 3 years into a new decade, 3 years into a new era, something shifted in East Harlem. A group of 14-year-old kids from Wagner Projects ventured out of their neighborhood. They called themselves the Get Paid Brothers. The name was not ironic. It was a mission statement. Billy, Big Loax, E.G., F.S., Bob Lemon, 14 years old, leaving Wagner Projects with an intention that most adults in their position would have called impossible. They were going to get money, not on the block where everyone knew them, not in the immediate geography of Wagner Projects where the rules were already set, and the positions were already filled. They went out, found angles, made connections, and built something from the specific organizational intelligence that 14-year-old boys from East Harlem develop when they decide that the rules of the legitimate economy do not apply to them. Their influence spread beyond their projects quickly. FS was the first man in Harlem with the Dapper Dan Parker, the specific luxury streetwear that Dapper Dan was creating in his Harlem boutique for the city's underground elite. The exclusive pieces announced a man's position before he said a word. Alpo Martinez, the man who would eventually become one of DC's most feared cocaine operators, saw FS with that Dapper Dan Parker and wanted one exactly like it. He had Dapper Dan make him one. The Get Paid brothers were setting trends that men like Alpo were following. But it was Bob Lemon who built the Get Paid brothers' name into something the entire east side of Harlem knew. $300,000 to $400,000 per day. Bob Lemon brought what the transcript called obsession to the east side. It was an operation generating hundreds of thousands of dollars daily from the streets of East Harlem. The money was coming so fast, but fast money also brings fast attention. Bob Lemon fell under investigation. He made a smart decision. He got low in Florida. He moved himself out of the immediate geography where law enforcement was building its case. He kept running from Florida, still collecting his money, still moving, still operating. Men brought his cash down to him or sent it. Bob Lemon was in Florida while his operation in East Harlem continued generating money without him physically present. Eventually, the FBI caught up. They arrested Bob Lemon and hit him with the 848 Kingpin charge. It was the most serious federal drug charge in the American legal system. The charge is reserved for the men at the top, the men who did not just deal, but who organized, directed, and managed drug operations at a scale that the government categorizes separately from ordinary trafficking. Bob Lemon received a 30-year sentence. He served it. In 2021, Bob Lemon walked out of federal prison. The man who had run $300,000 to $400,000 per day operations from East Harlem as a teenager made the same decision that other men in this compilation made when they finally came home. He became a community activist. He joined anti-violence organizations, including Led by Example. He founded his own nonprofit organization. His work has helped and provided assistance to thousands of kids and young men in Harlem and throughout the city of New York. The judge, who eventually sentenced him, said something that Lemon apparently took seriously. He said Bob Lemon was the type of man who needed to be in the community giving back. $300,000 to $400,000 per day as a teenager, 30 years served, home now, giving exactly what the judge said he needed to give. Number 6, the Purple City Crew. Wagner Projects, East Harlem. In the same Wagner Projects where the Get Paid brothers had built their reputation, a crew emerged with a concept so specific and so visually distinct that it became one of the most recognizable operations in New York City's crack era. Purple. Everything purple. The Purple City Crew operated on 122nd Street, and they did not do it quietly. BMW with purple neon lights underneath, purple 850, purple faces in their Rolexes. From 7 in the morning to 4:30 the next morning, 2.5 hours of rest, then back at it. The money was so good that men were sleeping in their parked cars outside rather than go home, because going home meant leaving the Strip, and leaving the Strip meant missing money every single day. The operation was also neighbors, for years, with the most powerful Italian mob family in America, the Genovese family. Their headquarters was Pleasant Avenue, the same avenue as one section of Wagner Projects. The Purple City crew operated directly across the street from the Italian mob's power structure in Manhattan, and it generated what Manhattan District Attorney Robert Morgenthau eventually called a $14 million per year operation. Not $14 million total, $14 million per year. The Purple City crew was also connected to the original Purple Gang, an earlier organization from those same streets whose name and mythology they carried forward into the crack era. Eventually, a multi-year investigation dismantled them. Early morning raid. 8 gang members arrested. Half a dozen cars with purple running lights seized. Purple everything was evidence. $14 million per year running out of Wagner Projects right across from the Genovese family's Pleasant Avenue headquarters. Purple City. Number 5. Puerto Rican Jesus. Cypress Hills, Brooklyn. Puerto Rican Jesus grew up in Cypress Hills, projects in Brooklyn. From the beginning, he was the one his siblings looked up to, the one who took responsibility, the one who figured things out. As a young kid, he got into an accident while riding his bike through Brooklyn. Instead of taking him to the hospital, the cops took him to his apartment. That decision became a lawsuit. And at 18 years old, Puerto Rican Jesus received his lawsuit settlement money. He invested it in himself as a street pharmacist. His spot on Pitkin Avenue became what he described as a gold mine, over $100,000 per day. As a teenager, in less than a year, he was a millionaire. He built a strong crew around him, built a reputation in Brooklyn that extended beyond Cypress Hills into the broader New York underground economy. He was fly. He was getting money. He was building with the specific speed that the crack economy rewarded in the men who understood its mathematics earliest. And his personality opened doors that money alone couldn't open. Mike Tyson took a liking to him, the heavyweight champion of the world, the most feared man on the planet inside a boxing ring. Mike Tyson moved through New York's underground world the way powerful men from Brooklyn always have, maintaining connections to the neighborhood that produced him, regardless of how far the fame took him. Puerto Rican Jesus was someone Tyson recognized, someone whose specific qualities, the flyness, the getting money, the Brooklyn authenticity, Tyson respected. Puerto Rican Jesus blended effortlessly into Harlem's young hustler world. He moved between boroughs with the kind of acceptance that men who are genuinely respected across geographic lines enjoy. He became good friends with Ozzie Faison. The two played basketball regularly, moving in the same Harlem underground world that Ozzie occupied alongside Rich Porter. And then one day, while Ozzie and Puerto Rican Jesus were playing basketball, some Brooklyn men pulled up. They pulled Jesus to the side. Brief conversation. They got back in the car and left. Puerto Rican Jesus walked back to Ozzie. He told him the truth. Those men came to kill you because of Alpo killing Dementio. Brooklyn had decided that Ozzie, connected to Alpo's world, needed to answer for what Alpo had done to Montana Benson. Puerto Rican Jesus told Ozzie before it happened. He saved Ozzie Faison's life. A Brooklyn man warning a Harlem man about Brooklyn men coming to kill him because the friendship between them was worth more than the borough politics that was driving the violence. Puerto Rican Jesus was still good in Harlem. He opened a sneaker store, an investment in something legitimate alongside the street operation. One late night in Harlem while gambling, he got into a shootout, shot twice. He survived. Puerto Rican Jesus, the boy from Cypress Hills who turned lawsuit money into $100,000 per day, who Mike Tyson respected, who saved Ozzie Faison's life, carried the specific scars that New York's crack era put on everyone who moved through it long enough. Number 4. Danny Diamonds and Calvin Klein. Marcy Projects, and Red Hook, Brooklyn. Danny Diamonds was the king of Marcy Projects, the same Marcy Projects where a young Sean Carter was growing up. He watched the world that men like Danny Diamonds had built, and he understood from a very early age what power looked like in Brooklyn. Danny had a connect, the best quality, the best prices, 4 safes in one house, top floor, middle floor, basement, one more for good measure. 4 safes, because the money was coming in so fast they did not know what to do with it. He was putting other men in position, giving operators in the neighborhood the opportunity to eat, to access product at prices that made their own operations viable. One of those men was from Red Hook Projects. His name in the streets was Calvin Klene. Calvin Klene connected with Danny Diamonds, and his life changed immediately. He went from moving a few bricks to having direct access to the best product at the best prices in Brooklyn. The government estimated that Calvin Klene was worth $28 million. Calvin himself put it this way: if I was worth $28 million, break that in half, break it in half again, break it in half a third time, and I'm still a multi-million-dollar dealer. That is a man describing $28 million as the top end of what he admits to. The conservative estimate: Calvin Klene moved through Brooklyn and eventually expanded his operation. And at some point in that expansion, he linked up with a young man from Marcy Projects named Sean Carter, Jay-Z. They made money together. In Calvin Klene's own words, "I made a lot of money with the brother, the future biggest rapper in the world." The man who would build Rockefeller Records and Roc Nation and eventually become a billionaire was making money with Calvin Klene on Brooklyn streets before any of that happened. The two eventually caught a case together. A party in 1989. Mayhem broke out. A dozen Brooklyn men against 200 people. Back to back when it all broke down. Jay and Calvin were the ones charged with attempt murder, the main battery, assault, and possession of a deadly weapon. Calvin had just been acquitted for a murder in 1989, 45 days earlier. Jay-Z looked at the situation, looked at Calvin, told him, "You've been through a lot. I don't really have a record. I could take the weight for this case." Calvin told him, "No, go home, straighten everything out, come back and bail me out." Jay-Z testified on Calvin Klene's behalf. Calvin blew trial down to 4 years for assault. The future billionaire testifying for a Brooklyn crack dealer. That is what those streets produced. That is what those relationships meant. Calvin Klene, $28 million operation, Danny Diamonds product, Jay-Z's testimony, Brooklyn in the 1980s. Number 3, Kevin Childs. Kevin Childs grew up in the High Bridge and Soundview section of the Bronx. He remembers having holes in his sneakers and putting cardboard in the bottom to cover them. That detail matters because everything Kevin Childs built, every dollar, every kilo, every connection, was built from a starting point of the cardboard in his sneakers. He got his introduction selling loose weed joints. By his senior year in high school, he had moved to cocaine. By 1985 and into 1986, he had connected with a young hustler from Harlem named Nappy Red. The two became partners and scaled up from a couple $100s a day to $30,000 per day at their new crack spot. $30,000 per day, while Kevin Childs was still practically a teenager. But here is where the story becomes something specific to Kevin Childs that no other man in this compilation can claim. There was a drought in New York. A shipment had been caught. The price of drugs jumped from $20,000 per kilo to $40,000 per kilo. Double, if you could even find it at all. Kevin Childs watched Scarface. And then he made a decision that tells you everything about who Kevin Childs actually was. He got on a plane with a bunch of money, his jewelry, his partner. He flew to Miami, looking for a connect, No introduction, no existing relationship, no guarantee that anyone in Miami would deal with two men from the Bronx who showed up unannounced looking for product during a New York drought. Just the specific courage of a man who understood that the supply existed somewhere and that the men controlling it would do business with anyone who showed up with real money and real credibility. He met Sam Ferguson, P-Man Sam, a well-known Florida dealer who recognized what Kevin Childs was. The relationship was formed. Kevin Childs came home from Miami with a Colombian connect that would change everything. Multiple kilos, expanding to other states, Washington, D.C., multiple markets. At his peak, Kevin Childs was making $300,000 per week. In 1987, he and his cousin purchased a Jeep. They took the top off. They rolled through the Bronx, throwing thousands of dollars out to the community. Not into their own pockets, to the community. That detail lives in Bronx history the way certain moments live in neighborhoods, documented in memory, passed down through the people who were standing on the block when it happened. Then, 1989. 3 masked men abducted a teenage girl. They robbed her and demanded more money. Somehow, she led them to Kevin Childs' mother's house. The gunmen went inside. They shot everyone in the house, including Kevin's mother, including the teenage girl they had abducted. 1 survivor. Kevin Childs described that moment the way a man describes the thing that ended something. That was my run. He didn't stop immediately. He kept operating, but the government was building its case. They were watching, following. 1994, Kevin Childs was arrested with 21 CO defendants, including his children's mother and including other family members. The government claimed he made over $40 million. The cooperating witness against him was a man Kevin Childs had once helped, a man whose life Kevin had saved. 2 trials. Both ended in hung juries. The government could not get 12 people to unanimously convict Kevin Childs twice. They offered a 10-year plea. Kevin accepted, under one condition. His best friend, who had been sentenced to 17 years, also received 10 years. Not for himself. He would only accept the deal if it protected his friend. They agreed. Kevin Childs served 10 years. He came home. The man with cardboard in his sneakers who watched Scarface and got on a plane to Miami and built a $300,000 per week operation across multiple states, who threw thousands of dollars from a topless Jeep to the Bronx community, who had his mother shot dead in her own house, accepted his plea only when his best friend's sentence was reduced. That is loyalty in its most expensive form. Number 2, the Fertado brothers, Southside Queens, the Kings of Kings. Tony, Lance, Todd, 3 brothers, originally from Harlem. They moved to the south side of Queens, home to Russell Simmons, Damon John, 50 Cent, and Irv Gotti. They were only 1 year apart in age. That meant they moved together the way that brothers who are close in age always move, as a unit, as a force. They started selling weed to help the family make ends meet. 20 to 30 pounds of weed at 12 and 13 years old. Out of 1,500 people associated with their organization, at least 500 were selling weed for the oldest brother, Tony. 500 people, moving weed for a 13-year-old from Queens. But Tony had bigger plans. In the early 1980s, Tony made a switch to powdered cocaine, and the brothers became what Queens streets eventually called them, the Kings of Kings. They supplied the Fat Cat organization. They supplied the Supreme Team. These were 2 of the most powerful drug organizations in Queens history, buying from the Fertado brothers. And then they outgrew their connect. They went direct, straight to a cartel in Colombia, not through intermediaries, not through someone else's relationship with the source. They had their own direct relationship with the Colombian cartel that supplied them. The numbers the government eventually produced in court were extraordinary. 3,000 kilos every 6 months. 200 kilos, generating $15 to $30 million per week. And they never took consignment. Every kilo was paid for. Every transaction was cash. No credit, no borrowed product, no owing anyone anything. The discipline of never taking consignment in an industry where consignment is how most operations expand is what gave them the specific leverage that kept them clean of the vulnerabilities that bring most operations down. They ran for over 20 years. Since 1979, 20 years of law enforcement attention, 20 years of staying on the radar while never giving the government enough to move. Their secret was specific, and Lance described it himself. They knew how to get ghost. When heat came, they shut down. Completely. For a year at a time. Let the investigation stall. Let the surveillance lose its thread. Then come back. The discipline required to walk away from 3,000 kilos every 6 months for an entire year to leave that money on the table because the heat required it is extraordinary. But it worked. For 20 years. Eventually, a major connect they were dealing with was working with the government. 1995, arrested with 32 people in 9 different states. Tony received 18 years. Lance received 15. Todd received 7 years and 11 months because of no physical evidence against him specifically. All 3 brothers are now home. They created the anti-drug, anti-gang warrior tour, implemented through schools and workshops across New York. 3 men who ran $15 to $30 million per week through a direct Colombian cartel connection, now in schools, teaching young people what that life actually costs. The Kings of Kings. Number 1, Dusty, Park Hill, Staten Island. The crack epidemic arrived on Staten Island a little later than the other boroughs. When it arrived, the effects were the same. Addiction and violence and money. Park Hill, the public housing development that the streets renamed Killer Hill. In the summer of 1988, the summer of 1989, Brooklyn tried to attack, Queens tried to attack, the Bronx tried to attack, Manhattan tried to attack. Every borough sent men to Staten Island to try to take what the island had built. They all learned the same thing. Staten Island defended itself. And the man who held it together, the kingpin the island was organized around during that era, was a man named Dusty. His operation on Killer Hill represented something specific about Staten Island's crack era, a borough that most of New York's criminal history overlooks, a borough that gets mentioned last when the conversation turns to New York's underground economy, a borough that was in many ways the most isolated and therefore the most internally organized of the 5. Dusty ran it. When Brooklyn came, he defended it. When Queens came, he defended it. When the Bronx and Manhattan came, he defended it. 4 boroughs tried to take Staten Island. None of them succeeded. But the federal government eventually did what 4 boroughs could not. 2 life sentences plus 80 years. Dusty's run on Staten Island ended in a federal courtroom with a sentence designed to ensure he would never see the street again, for the man who held Killer Hill when 4 boroughs tried to take it. That is the story of Staten Island's crack era that nobody tells properly. 8 stories, 5 boroughs, 1 era. Minimum wage was $3.35 per hour. The government was not building schools in Wagner Projects or Cypress Hills or Marcy Projects or Park Hill that would give these children a visible path to the kind of money their intelligence and organizational capacity were capable of generating. The government was not offering 14-year-olds from East Harlem legitimate business development programs that would channel the specific genius of a Bob Lemon or a get-paid brother into something that did not end in a federal courtroom. The government was offering $3.35 per hour, and cardboard in your sneakers, and food stamps, and government cheese. These 8 men looked at that offer and made a different calculation. Jesse Gray and Freddie Meyers in Harlem, Bob Lemon and the Get Paid brothers in Wagner Projects, the Purple City crew on 122nd Street, Puerto Rican Jesus in Cypress Hills, Danny Diamonds and Calvin Klein in Marcy and Red Hook, Kevin Childs in the Highbridge Bronx, who put cardboard in his sneakers and watched Scarface and flew to Miami, the Fertado brothers in Queens, who bought direct from the Colombian cartel and ran for 20 years, and Dusty on Killer Hill, who held Staten Island when 4 boroughs tried to take it. All of them teenagers when it started. All of them operating at scales that the legitimate economy had never made available to boys who grew up where they grew up. History remembered the names it was forced to remember. This video gave flowers to the ones it forgot.